Hey everyone, it's Blair here at Time Trades. Thanks for joining me this weekend. Today is Sunday, June 26th, and this is your weekly video. Quick announcement before we get into it. There's going to be no video next week because I'm going to be at the Canadian National Karate Championships. I'm not competing, but I will be watching my son compete there. So for that reason, the next video will be in 2 weeks' time. Okay, so with that out of the way, I want to take a little different approach to today's video. I got what I thought was a very good request from one of the viewers of last week's video. They wanted to see a applied example of the pyramid, the hierarchy of importance that we talked about in last week's video. So this is what I mean by that. It shows the framework for decision making that I found to be useful in helping to interpret all of the information in time trades. So as a quick review, it starts with price because price is basically, as traders, it's how we get paid, it's how we manage risk. Magic levels are very effective at identifying key levels as well as Heikin-Ashi bars. The second most important item is context here. So that includes signals like medium pivots or small pivots, cheat codes, short-term waves, and Gann waves. And then finally, we get to the daily forecast. And so the daily forecast, I think, is what a lot of people associate with time trades. But in my opinion, while they're important, they're only the third most important element when making a trading decision. These are computed at a daily level of precision, and they're subject to inversions, and they can change from day to day. So with all of that being said, I think it's important to have a hierarchy here that uses price and context first to make decisions, and then finally the daily forecast. So I want to talk a little bit about how to apply this pyramid, and we're going to start with price, and we're going to look at price action from the last week. And these are the things I look for in judging price. Is there a recent magic level cross? I think it's really important to trade in the direction of the last magic level cross. In fact, that's one of my trading rules. Gaps up over magic levels or gaps down across magic levels are super important. By that, I mean either like the true magic levels that are shown in the Time Trades web app or in the TradingView script, or you can use the sub magic levels if you're trading intraday. And I always suggest that you continue to use your favorite price indicator, whether you're using, some combination of EMAs or MACD or PPO or RSI. There's a million different price indicators. I'm kind of neutral on that. I happen to use the TD sequential quite a bit, but that's just personal preference. So let's go back and take a look at what happened last week through the lens of judging price action. So we're going to flip over to TradingView here. We're going to look at Bitcoin, and let's zoom in here at a 30-minute level, and we can see what happened last week in Bitcoin as it kind of stabilizes after that huge flush that down to the 17,000s. And once we get the magic levels, we can see here how Bitcoin really respected the magic levels. Of course, it flushed down through, and it ended right in a void of course on June 18th, which I found really interesting because the orange box or the moon void of course period is where you'll often see fake outs and reversals. And of course, we got a huge reversal there right in the middle. But then price proceeded to cross one magic level and a second magic level. And typically when we see a magic level being crossed, we will see this pattern of retests. So we saw 1, 2, 3 retests of 19.8, and all 3 times that held. So that's actually relatively bullish for Bitcoin because the last magic level cross is still back here, right, when we crossed up above it on the 19th of June. So as we look ahead, if we get another magic level cross, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to buy the breakout. You can wait for the retest of the magic level, and often that's the better play. Sure, sometimes you'll see it blast off and then not look back, and you're left wishing that you bought the breakout. But more often than not, you'll get a breakout and then a retest, and then it's that's the breakout from that retest is really where you want to enter. Okay, so that's Bitcoin. We can also look at the Qs here, and we can take a look at some of the price action last week in the Qs. This is a 1 hour chart, and we're going to switch over to regular candles because I want to show this gap up and over a magic level here at 285, and this is extremely bullish for the Qs. Whenever you get these gaps up and over magic levels, it's not to be ignored. And this actually was my best trade last week, was jumping on this right at the open on Friday, and I caught most of this big green bar here using 0 DTE options. So that worked out well for me. Again, we had a strong bar going into the close, and that bodes well for next week. The other thing to notice here, and we'll get to this in the context section, is you can see how the small pivots are working out. They're working out really well. So we can see a small pivot here. And, you know, when it comes to evaluating small pivots, it's important not to look at you know, just that specific bar, but kind of the rough area around the small pivot. And we can see we got a small pivot here. Price is really close to this magic level. It gave us a big fake out here. It looked like it was going to take off, but then a gap down below. And you know, this was really a clue that it, given the combination of the small pivot here and the gap down below the magic level, this was a pretty strong clue that it wasn't going to make it up above 310. Now we've had this small pivot on the 14th. And again, it looked like it was going to be a strong breakout from that. That failed, but we made a bottom a couple days later on the 16th. And since then, we've been steadily going up. And so now it's kind of clear that this next small pivot is very likely to be a high. Excuse me. And that is scheduled for the 29th next week, which is Wednesday. Okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean there's a high guaranteed on Wednesday. It could be the 28th, it could be the 30th. You can see there's a, you know, a bit of an error bar range around these small pivots. Okay, so that's a great example of the of how to judge price action using the magic levels. Okay, when it comes to context, we can take a look at where are we in the small pivot and medium pivot cycle. What is Mercury doing? Is there any cheat codes coming up? Where are we in the lunar cycle? That's how we evaluate context. So if we zoom out here, let's go to like a 4-hour chart. And what we can do is actually hide price. And if you want to evaluate you know, the effectiveness of the small pivots and the medium pivots, just as a tool to help keep you in sync, what I like to do is turn on this Ehlers instantaneous trend line. I'll pop up the dialog here so you can see the title. This is a very effective way to get a trended view of price without the daily bar noise. So I like this as a better EMA or SMA without the lag that you tend to get in those moving averages. So to remove some of the visual clutter from the chart, you can just hide your price bar. And now you're just looking at the Ehlers instantaneous trend line. And in fact, to make it even easier to look at, we can go to a daily view. And in the daily view, we can see how effective the medium pivots and the small pivots have been over the last few days. So this medium pivot here really caught this high quite well. We had another medium pivot here on May 20th, and you can see how things are starting to turn. And I really think the proxy for this medium pivot cycle that we're in from May 21st through to July 18th, the one that we should be looking at as an analog is not the most recent one, but the one before. Okay, so that is January 22nd through to April 5th. And one of the things I'm looking at and anticipating is this late pump into the last minor pivot cycle here. So given the bullish way we ended things last week, I'm thinking that we can see a continuation of that into this small pivot here this week, with potential for a little pullback before a final push up into July 18th, the July 18th medium pivot. So honestly, it wouldn't surprise me to see if we tag 320 or 322 here. Okay, so that's the small pivot and medium pivot cycle. The second thing I want to talk about here is Mercury, and Mercury seems to be so important for a lot of what we follow. Let's flip over to time trades. We're going to turn on the short-term waves, and short-term waves shows Mercury's speed in yellow. And if you go back in time, you can see how that tends to correlate with positive price performance. So you can see here back in October, Mercury was speeding up, price went up. Back in January, Mercury was speeding up, and it took a while, but eventually price went up with a peak in late March, early April. And now we're in another cycle where Mercury is speeding up, and we've got a peak coming up here in mid-July combined with medium pivot cycle. So that's something to be aware of, is we're getting a tailwind from Mercury here, and that also applies to most stocks and crypto. Okay, so let's take a look at what else. Daily forecast. So this brings us to the daily forecast. I'm just going to skip over some of the other context stuff in the interest of time. But when it comes to interpreting daily forecast, in general, pivots are the most rare and should take first priority in your hierarchy of interpreting the forecasts. And then 2 standard deviation moves, and then 1 standard deviation moves, and then ask yourself, does everything align with the price and context information that you have, keeping in mind that the forecast moves can invert. And don't just form an opinion based on one index or one stock. I recommend looking at indexes, bonds, and major stocks to form an opinion, and look for clusters of probabilities as well, not just like one-off spikes. All right, so let's go over to time trades, and we can take a look at that. So if we start with the Qs here, I'm just going to turn off short-term waves. Okay, so if we start with the Qs, the way we would assess this is, okay, so we've got a small pivot low on June 28th with a big down day forecast on June 28th. So this doesn't really align with how we closed the week last week, right, with that bullish spike. Now, the thing you got to keep in mind is, there's a chance that this could invert. So let's explore a few more indexes and a few more of the major stocks that are components of the Qs. We can look at the spiders. Let's see if there's alignment between these. Okay, so the spiders is also showing a down day on Monday, and then a pivot high over here on July 5th. Okay, so that agrees with the Qs. Let's look at diamonds. Okay, so diamonds is showing also some down days here on June 28th. So that's a Tuesday. Let's take a look at some of the components of the Qs. I always like to start with Apple as the biggest component of the Qs. That's got a pivot high on June 30th, and it also has some increasing probabilities of up days through to the end of the week, July 1 and June 30th as well. Okay, so this is Apple is looking a little bit more bullish than the Qs. And so let's just go through some of the biggest components of the Qs here. We've got Microsoft, nice little combination of 2 standard deviation up moves here. Very little activity on the downside, although there is a bit of, an isolated 2 standard deviation move here of 17%. On the whole, this is pretty bullish. We can look at Google. Google has some continued up days here. Nothing really on the downside until we get some 1 standard deviation days later in the week. And then maybe a little bit more next week, July 5th, in combination with some pivot lows. Okay. Let's look at Meta. So with Meta, this looks a little bit ambiguous. We've got some cross currents here in the forecast. We've got a pivot high June 29th, but also some down days, increasing probability of down days as the week goes on. In this type of scenario, I would put priority on the pivots over the moves down. So it looks like it's going to be going up into June 29th, and then we've got a pivot low July 5th. Amazon. So Amazon, again, it looks a little ambiguous. We've got some 1 standard deviation down moves, but we also have a small probability pivot high. The big probability move here looks like this pivot high July 5th combined with some moves down. So it looks like there's a solid, week, 10 days of likely down pressure here from July 5th to the 15th or so. And we'll wrap things up with a few more major components. We've got NVIDIA. NVIDIA is looking actually fairly bullish with some 1 standard deviation moves up, little to no down pressure here. We've got a pivot low July 5th, like a lot of others. Yeah, so that seems to be a common pattern here, is a pivot low after the holiday long weekend. And we'll wrap things up with Tesla and then Costco. So Tesla is looking relatively bullish, I guess, but we're close to the thing I want to avoid is I don't want to buy with declining up probabilities, right? So I wouldn't be a buyer here of Tesla. This move up may continue, but I don't want to be a buyer here with these forecast up probabilities going down in the future. So we may have seen the bulk of the move already in Tesla here. We've got a pivot high forecast for June 29th. And we can look at Costco quickly. Costco is looking actually really quite bullish with increasing probability of up days through July 6th. Okay, so that is how I tend to look at the daily probabilities in the context of the price information and the small pivot cycles and the medium pivot cycles. And where I would net things out right now is, in general, I'm bullish through this small pivot on the 29th for the Qs, and Then I think we get that little move down. We saw a lot of pivot lows around July 5th and 6th. Okay. And it wouldn't surprise me to see a push up into that last medium pivot on July 18th. Okay. So be aware of a short-term top this week. We certainly have lots of positive momentum heading into the week, but at the same time, there's also lots of overhead resistance and overhead supply. Let's take a quick look at Bitcoin here and see what the forecast looks like here. So we have a little bit of ambiguity here with down moves, a cluster of down days right around a pivot high. So one of the things I think is going to happen is I think the pivot high is going to take precedence. I think we're going to see a pivot high on June 27th. Again, that's right around where that small pivot is. And then we're likely to see some moves down here in the subsequent week. So again, we see a little bit of pivot low around July 5th, July 6th, and then some higher probabilities of moves up after that. If I were to locate where that medium pivot is, the MP cycle, it's right around the 17th, 18th, I think. And you can see how after that, the tone of the forecast kind of change. All right. So very similar forecasts, I think, for Bitcoin compared to the Qs. A little bit of up pressure and support for the first couple of days in the week, a return of some of that bullish energy, but then I think the small pivot will start to take effect. All right, so that's it for the review. The last thing I want to do today is I want to go over influencers, and I did spend some time this week restoring the influencers feature. Now, this influencers feature is not enabled for every stock yet. I have to generate the data on the back end. But for the stocks that do have influencers, this little button here is enabled. Okay, so it is enabled for the Qs. We can click on that. I'm going to give you a quick tour on what we're seeing here. So let's start with the overall tab. Okay, so on the overall tab, you can see here that this is showing the 100 most influential events out of a total of 12,039. So this is what we're using. On the back end, we're using 12,039 astrological events to generate the probabilities, and we're using machine learning to do that. So what you're seeing here is the most influential 100 out of those 1239, and you can sort by the different models and items that we forecast. So here, when we build a probability of pivot high, the number one most influential is Mercury's geocentric speed. Number two is Venus Anticia moon. So if you're an astrologer, you know what Anticia means. If you're not, you should probably Google it to find out what that means. Moon square 90 Venus. You can see all of the items here. Most of them are self-evident what they are. But one of the things that I do want to build out here is a glossary that will clearly state exactly what these mean for the non-astrologers. Okay. One of the things I think it's important to understand is that I differentiate between a planet entering a sign and a planet being in a sign. And most of the activity we see is when planets or the moon enters a new sign. Okay, so those differences are captured here. And as you go through, you can click on pivot low. You can see what's the most influential over a pivot low, and you can see here how the top four are all related to terms. And for the astrologers out there, I'm using Egyptian terms, not the other kind of terms, but the importance of terms is, wow, look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 terms in the top 20. That's just insane. So yeah, terms super important. And you can make your way through the table, click on each of these to see the top influencers over 1 standard deviation moves up. A smaller number is better, okay, because it's a rank, and I've normalized the rank from 0 to 100, so it's a lot more, it's easier to compare. Okay, so that's the overall table. When you click on lunar transits, you get a breakdown of the moon and when the moon is making angles with different planets, including the North Node. And again, it uses the exact same ranking system where a smaller number is better. And I've put a box around the top 20% most influential items here. So you can see for the Qs, Mercury or the moon making a 60-degree or sextile angle with Mercury is in the top 4th percentile, basically. So that's a major influencer over pivot highs. And Venus as well. This is basically the 3rd percentile. So a square or 90-degree angle with Venus is the in the 3rd percentile. So you can see here how influential a lot of these angles are, and simply by counting the number of boxes, we can see the North Node is probably on average the most influential. So these are angles between the moon and its ascending node or North Node. So that's got basically 4 major influencers there. And then as we scroll down, we can see the influence that the moon entering a sign has over pivot highs. Okay, so we're still in the pivot high section. So we can see that it's most likely to make pivot highs when the moon enters Sagittarius, actually. This is the moment that the moon, or sorry, the day, I shouldn't say the moment, the day that the moon enters Sagittarius. It's not, and the moon will spend, 2 to 3 days in any given sign. It's not the entire time span. It's just when the moon enters that sign, okay? And then there's subsequent tables for pivot lows, up days. So in this table, I've combined both 1 and 2 standard deviations together. So this is the mean influence over both of those, and same thing with down days. Okay. One thing you might be wondering about, what's this GC? That's not a zodiac sign. That is the galactic center. Okay, so that occurs in late Sagittarius. So sometimes that can be very influential over big moves. Okay. So most of the major stocks have influencers set up, but I'm working my way through the rest of the stocks and coins right now. The last thing, and probably the most obvious, is, it's like, okay, Blair, that's great. You've told me what's important, but what's coming up in the near future? So when you click on the calendar tab, that answers that question. So out of the most 100 influential events, these are the ones that occur over the next 6 weeks. So you can take a look at this list and you can see that, well, in the next few days, we've got Neptune going retrograde starting June 28th. So that is one of the major influencers that influences a pivot low, and that's starting basically in the next 2 days. And you can see that also influences moves up. So by taking a look at this, we're editing down the massive list of events that can happen in the sky to just those that are proven to have effect over price. And we've broken it down according to each of the 6 different price behaviors that we track here. So this is actually really useful. And I think he can use it to gauge what is scheduled to happen, and use that to provide another angle of interpretation into the overall probabilities that are generated. Okay, so that's it for me for this week. I wish you luck trading. Have a great week, and we will talk to you again in 2 weeks from now. Thank you. Bye now.